All right, the last time we caught up with BYU football, they were on the field against Memphis in more of a football brawl than football game, although it was a tremendous game. Well, it's remembered, of course, were the fisticuffs after the overtime session. We bring in Mitch Harper of 1320 KFAN to break down BYU 2015 because, of course, the Cougars are in spring practice along with the rest of college football. Mitch, how are you?
Doing great, Mark. Happy to be back on. It's been a while since we last talked, so happy to be back on the show as always.
It has been a while, but we was in the past, so this should be no different. So before we dive into spring practice, let's talk about the brawl because there were just that just captured the day in sports overall. What was said around that time, the aftermath from Cougar Nation about what happened?
Well, yeah, it was quite the brawl. I just remember watching that game, and it was a really good football game. It was back and forth. If you were just a casual college football fan, you're watching that game and thinking, man, this Miami Beach Bowl turned into a pretty good football game, back and forth, high scoring, and then in overtime, BYU's moving down the field to tie it up against Memphis, and all hell broke loose, for lack of a better term, and it was an ugly brawl where fisticuffs and bloody faces were involved. And it was only like 30 seconds long, but the type of punches that were being thrown, it was pretty bad. And it was kind of one of those things where BYU, being a image conscious school, it wasn't the best look for them. So it was something that a lot of folks were maybe wondering, will this lead to players getting kicked out or suspensions? What's going to be the fallout from this? Bronco Mendenhall actually tipped off at spring football, the beginning of the spring camp earlier this month. He did say that he will, or there could be up to 10 players possibly not this or receiving discipline from that brawl, whether that's a game suspension, whether that's missing practice, some sort of discipline will fall out from that, and the decisions on that will take place when BYU gets closer to their season opener against Nebraska. So who knows what happens there? But it wasn't the best way to end the season for BYU. It was another 8-5 year, the third straight season that's happened under Bronco Mendenhall as a football independent, and it was kind of a reflection, I think, of BYU's season, where it was a lot of missed opportunities, and I think they, at the end of that season, after that loss, they just kind of let the emotions out, and it was a team that was plagued with injuries. Taysom Hill, Jamal Williams, I mean, the who's who of the team were going down with injury, and they were losing to the best teams on their schedule, and losing the way they did in that Miami Beach Bowl just left a bad feeling. I think it's left a group now looking forward that are very motivated. It's low expectations too. A lot of BYU fans are kind of skeptical, which is kind of unusual around these parts. Most fans, expectations are usually through the roof, but right now folks are kind of wondering if this is just a wash, rinse, repeat type program where it's just 7-6, 8-5, and they're kind of in this rut of mediocre football, which is not the norm for a tradition-rich program like BYU.
Yeah, I was actually watching that game getting ready for work. I had pushed off work. I was late for work because it was such a great game. I just kept pushing it back and back and wanting to see the end of the football game. They went to overtime. I watched most of the overtime, then I thought, okay, I need to get to work. So I taped the end of the game, knowing that based on where I work, there's no way for me to avoid the outcomes of the games, but I like to watch all the bowl games and watch the action on the field. So I get to work not knowing what happened, knowing that they went to overtime, and I watched a little bit of overtime, and then I tape the rest of it, DVR the rest of it, and then I get to work, and people are talking about the Miami Beach Bowl all over the place. I'm thinking, I know it was a great game, but why is everybody talking about it? Well, yeah, it turned out to be a big fight, and of course that captured the day and much of the week of sports in general, not just college football. So you mentioned Taysom Hill, you mentioned Jamal Williams. Of course, Hill is the face of the franchise, and Williams certainly an impact player as well. So can you give me a health status, Mitch, at this point?
Yeah, Taysom Hill, obviously, most notably. I mean, he's kind of the end all. You start with Taysom Hill, you end with Taysom Hill on this team, and he was someone last year that really had the nation captivated. I mean, if you remember, BYU started out 4-0, nationally ranked. Everyone's talking, is BYU going to be the team that pushes the envelope in the first year of the college football playoff, how will the committee view an independent BYU that's in some way kind of viewed as a group of five program, even though a lot of their history and resources would suggest otherwise. But they were 4-0 and trending, looking at a schedule that ESPN and a lot of networks had going undefeated. And then that Utah State game on a nationally televised Friday night, Taysom went down with a season-ending injury, and it looked like a devastating injury that could possibly keep him out for maybe 10, 11 months. And spring football started up, and going into this thing, it started at the beginning of March. I went in thinking that Taysom was going to be, pretty much useless, for lack of a better term. I just thought, there's not much that he can do, but he's actually participating in everything besides 11-on-11 team drills, which is basically, their scrimmage type work. He's participating in everything, and he's looking good. I mean, he's even said, and coaches have said, that if Nebraska week was this week, Taysom would play. And they feel confident he's going to be the Taysom of old, which is pretty remarkable considering the type of player that Taysom is. I mean, he's a guy that great, phenomenal athlete. I mean, he's 6'3". You look at him, he's built like a safety. I mean, he's huge, and he can run, he can truck defenders. I mean, and Texas knows him all too well the last 2 years, what he's done to the Longhorns. So Taysom is a very talented player, and I think everyone around Provo expects Taysom to be the type of player that he was at the beginning of last season. And he looked very comfortable in this offense last year. In 2013, his first full season as the starter, it was a new offense being implemented by Robert and I, the offensive coordinator. It was an up-tempo attack, go fast, go hard. I mean, BYU emphasizes tempo and getting off plays. They get off more plays than Oregon does in any given game. And in last season, though, he felt very comfortable as that starting quarterback. But then when he went down with the injury, the wheels went off for BYU, and they lost 4 straight. And they got a few more wins towards the end of the year, but all those games were against teams that weren't bowl eligible or D2 or FCS schools. So but Taysom now in spring, he's looking good, and I think the forecast is high that he's going to be what he was last season, and someone that could potentially be a sleeper candidate for the Heisman Trophy, just because of the type of how he's an entertaining player. I mean, he's someone that can captivate folks, and BYU is going to be in a lot of nationally televised games that will give him an opportunity to make a name for himself early. And you mentioned Jamal Williams too. He suffered a devastating ACL injury last season against Middle Tennessee. The forecast for him right now, not as bright as Taysom Hill. Jamal's been held out of everything in spring football. They hope to have him healthy for fall camp. That's the goal. He's working really hard to get there, but in the back of my mind, he's an interesting case because he's got a redshirt year available. He's still very young. He's only 19 years old. He's already played 3 seasons at BYU. So, I mean, if he's not ready to go, there's a possibility that maybe he could redshirt. The lack of depth at running back spot kind of makes it tricky because they're expecting him, because with Taysom as a senior and Jamal as a senior, they want those two in the same offensive backfield, because they feel if they're anywhere close to 100%, they feel like this offense can be pretty dynamic and can put up points on anyone.
So there's the quarterback and the running back, hopefully, if Jamal Williams is healthy this fall. As you review the depth chart, Mitch, give us a feel for what we can expect in regards to what's being worked out this spring in regards to position battles.
Yeah, the most notable position battle, I would say, is at the free safety spot. Craig Bills, a 3-year starter, he leaves. His career was actually cut short due to a concussion. So he's been gone, so they're used to already having Bills away from the program already. They got used to that towards the tail end of last season. But one of the more notable players that's been making a name for himself in spring football is his junior college transfer from Snow JC. He actually led all junior college football last year in interceptions. His name is Eric Takanaka. Very unheralded recruit. Probably wouldn't pull up his name in any recruiting services, but he's someone that BYU and Bronco Mendenhall feels is going to be a difference maker in the defensive secondary. And Bronco, it should be noted too, he's going to be back as the defensive coordinator this season. Last year he gave the reins to Nick Howell, who was kind of an understudy, if you will, to Bronco, viewed by many as like a Bronco clone in terms of his mannerisms and his work ethic and the way he views evaluating athletes. Kind of likes the unheralded gritty kid. But Bronco's back at defense coordinator, and the theme of spring football has been amongst players talking with the media, accountability, discipline. I mean, BYU last year, the defense was the worst statistically over the past 20 years or 21 years in BYU football. And BYU just a couple of years ago was the #1 scoring defense in all the country back in 2012. So it was a pretty big drop, something that folks around here haven't been used to for quite some time. And a lot of it they blame on Bronco not being the defensive coordinator. So now he's back, and a lot of folks are expecting the defense to be back to the level that it was. I think that's kind of tough to expect, though, because there isn't that Kyle Van Noy. There isn't that Ziggy Ansah, two guys that were drafted, highly drafted kids. A lot of folks are wondering right now in spring who's the face of this defense. And there's some talented kids, most notably Bronson Kaufusi, 6'7". He's someone that could have a future playing at the next level, being drafted maybe this time next year. But he plays defensive end, outside linebacker. They kind of use him like a DeMarcus Ware in this 3-4 defense. And Kaufusi is someone that's going to have to take on a big role as a senior. But it's going to be maybe a no-name type defense, but they feel that they'll be bend but don't break, but they won't give up points, which is kind of a trademark of Bronco Mendenhall defenses.
If you stick around a program these days, Mitch, for about a decade as a head coach, that's considerable time. Gone are the days of Joe Paterno and Bobby Bowden. Right now, Frank Beamer's been around forever based on this day and age, and guys like Bill Snyder and Bob Stoops, in the 15-year range. So Bronco Mendenhall's been at the program for quite a long time. You mentioned the 7 and 8 win campaigns. They're piling up. So what's his status right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. Bronco is someone just a few years ago. I don't think anyone would ever thought that Bronco would have went out on his terms. Whatever the outcome, Bronco was going out on his terms, because you got to remember when he came in, he came into BYU from New Mexico back in 2003 as the defensive coordinator, and at the time BYU's head coach was Gary Crowton. Probably most well known for his time at maybe LSU, Chicago Bears as the offensive coordinator. He was the head coach at Louisiana Tech. But Crowton brought Bronco in. They were good friends, but during that time, 2003, 2004, the program was really having a lot of off-the-field issues, honor code violations, and there was a lot of turmoil behind the scenes. Bronco took over the head coaching job in 2005. And he really cleaned up the program and emphasized BYU's mission as a Mormon LDS school, and really emphasized the values of what BYU stands for as a school and their mission as a whole. And because of that, and then the success that started to come in on the football field, reviving a program that has a lot of tradition, folks were thrilled with what Bronco was doing. And it just, like I said, it looked like Bronco was going to build a type of stability where he could call his shots and go out when he wants to. But now I think with a lot of what's happened in college football, the climate of what's happened with realignment and BYU's status compounded with Utah, the rival, going to the Pac-12, and Utah going to some BCS bowl games, it's made BYU and Broncos' job very difficult, where folks are expecting if you don't go undefeated, it's a failure. Because really, as a football independent, if you go 11-1, you're going to the Miami Beach Bowl or whatever bowl game you're already scheduled for well before the season even starts. So it's a very tough job, and losing games that they've lost the past few years, losing to San Jose States, Nevadas, it's kind of worn on the fan base, and they're not in that honeymoon phase anymore with Bronco. And some of his comments, about fans, and maybe if there's talks of he's not big on the fan base or fans in general, it's kind of made it a situation where fans are no longer feeling endeared to him anymore, and they're wondering what else is out there, who's going to get BYU back to competing at the highest level because maybe they feel that Bronco has hit his ceiling. Bronco, I think, is one of the best defensive minds around. I mean, he coached Brian Urlacher and developed him at New Mexico. He has a track record of success of developing guys, but he does have weird tendencies that some people just can't wrap their mind around in the modern day climate of college football. But I think this year, though, it's an interesting situation because after last year and all the ups and downs that last season had, and some of Bronco's comments with about fans and the program as a whole, there was talks that he was considering the Oregon State job. He was proactively pursuing that when Mike Riley left for Nebraska. But then when Gary Anderson became an option for Oregon State, those talks kind of died down because Bronco played at Oregon State. That's his alma mater. So it seemed like a natural fit that maybe he could actually fit there. There was also talks that maybe he applied at Wisconsin, but that doesn't have any much validity there. But what I'm saying is that it feels now going into this season where Bronco, he's got 2 years left on his contract, 2015 and 2016. There's no talks really or discussions about maybe a contract extension. So a lot of folks around here think that if it's not a successful season, we're talking maybe 8 to 10 wins. And I think 8 wins would be good this year just because of how tough the schedule is compared to previous seasons. There's talks that maybe BYU would look elsewhere because, with being independent, the schedules they're building up, they don't have time to wait. They want to make a push to get into the Big 12 and make a statement that, BYU football is back. They're back in the national top discussion, and that their only path to control is winning football games. And they feel that maybe if Bronco can't get them there, that they might go in another direction. Or if Bronco has success a lot this year, he might look for another job and start a new chapter in his life. He's always said that he's not a BYU lifer by any stretch. So it's an interesting dynamic. I would imagine if I was to make any bets or guesses, I think he's going to coach till 2016, and maybe he'll go off into the sunset because he's always said he's not going to coach forever. He wants to enjoy his kids and his wife and be at home or something. But I would say after 2016, if BYU is having success, he'll go off into the sunset and maybe resign, or if it gets ugly on the field, then there's a possibility he could get canned like anyone else in college football.
Mitch Harper joins us from 1320 KFAN. He also has an affiliation with KFAN, Cougar Center podcast. So before we let you go, Mitch, you mentioned the schedule, allude to future games with Nebraska coming up as the opener this season and some other interesting dates. I see just a few days ago that Mississippi State was added to the schedule. Last summer, I went through every Power 5 conference schedule in America, and I typically tore them to shreds because I get sick of seeing FCS, a group of 5, and maybe one decent game for most teams. And there were some teams out there that play in some very, very power conferences that weren't able to schedule anyone for whatever reason. So I don't like the scheduling in college football. We look at BYU, and I have no such claims in this area that the schedule is extremely difficult. What's the strategy there? You mentioned not vying for a conference championship because that incentive, it just doesn't exist. Needing to win all the games to play your way, or at least maybe an 11-1 into the elite bowl tier. The strategy, as you see it, Mitch, in scheduling these games.
Yeah, I mean, you got to think it dates back, I think, decades. You probably remember this era, Mark. I mean, back in the 80s when BYU was a legitimate powerhouse, a lot of folks discredited them because they were in the WAC or they were in the Mount West and they weren't playing anyone. They weren't playing any of the big boys. So for years, BYU has always wanted to prove their worth against the who's who of college football. And with the move to independence back in 2011, BYU has really made it clear. Athletic director Tom Holmoe, he said that he wants to play anyone, anywhere, anytime, kind of like the old Fresno State mantra, if you will. But he wants to get the best college football programs on these schedules for BYU to really prove their worth, because BYU could go to like the Mountain West or the American Athletic Conference if they truly just wanted to be in a conference and vie for conference crowns. But more and more in this new era of college football, it's all about perception and image. And if you're a group of 5, you're a have-not. You know, you're not viewed as one of the ones. So, you know, you're not viewed as the elite. BYU's in that in-between range, and they feel that if you can beat a Nebraska, if you can beat a UCLA, if you can beat even a Boise State who's group of 5 but, you know, had national success, you're going to be viewed as a program that is the real deal. And I think that's something that BYU has always wanted, and they want to really take this program to a new level, and they want to position themselves to get into a Power 5 conference too. And I think, you know, like I said earlier, the only way that they can control that is by winning football games on the field. So it's going to be tough because, I mean, it's like you said, I mean, Nebraska, Boise State, UCLA, Michigan, at Kansas City to play Missouri of the SEC. So there's some tough games in there. And, you know, but BYU feels that this is what they have to do because, you know, I think back to their first season of independence, 2011, they went 10-3, but they had 10 wins against teams that were sub-80 Sagarin. They were all like group of 5 teams, and the 3 teams that were from Power 5 leagues, they lost. So no one looked at it as a successful year. You know, if you go 9-4 with this type of schedule or 2016 schedule, I mean, you're not going to be in a position for a college football playoff or a Fiesta Bowl or anything like that, but folks are going to say, like, that's a very good season, and, you know, it's a program that's trending in the right direction. And what's in BYU too, they really benefit from their partnership with ESPN as well. I mean, games like Missouri, games like Nebraska, you know, ESPN looks at BYU as a valuable entity because, I mean, compared to what they pay for conferences, BYU's pennies, you know, compared to what they have to pay for these leagues, and they're a Western time slot, and TV. It's always the novelty of non-conference games in college football is always interesting. I mean, no one wants to watch what am I thinking, like a Michigan Minnesota game at noon. Those games just bring no excitement for folks. But a BYU Missouri, that's kind of interesting in Arrowhead Stadium. So BYU is an independent. They're willing to play anyone, anywhere. Now, do they have the personnel that's ready for this type of gauntlet? Maybe they're biting a little bit too much, but I think it's necessary for the program to really get a true gauge of where they're at, and also to really, if they do win, it could be a huge reward for the program moving forward.
So I guess that it's not been stated, Mitch, by anyone in any official capacity that the goal is to stay independent, schedule tough, and win, or schedule tough, prove that we belong, join a Power 5. So I'll throw this out to you. I've heard about the Big 12. Is that a real possibility?
You know, the goal, first off, is clear. BYU wants in a league. You know, Bronco Mendenhall has even said it, Tom Homo, the athletic director, they want in a Power 5 league, but independence is good for them right now. But to answer your question, I honestly think the Big 12 will explore every option possible to stay at 10 teams, just because these programs are making close to $25 million a year. Like, Iowa State is pulling down $25 million a year. Kansas is pulling down $25 million a year. They don't bring anything to the table, but because there's only 10 mouths to feed, they're bringing in some big paydays that are comparable, if not better, than the SEC, because they have 14 mouths to feed. So in that sense, does BYU, if they get added to that league, do they increase the pot, or do they just take away? And, you know, playoff or not, the Big 12, the presidents, the ADs, they're cashing big fat checks, and I think that's going to be the biggest thing. Does BYU and is there a 12th team that makes this worthwhile? Now, because, I mean, you run down South Florida, Cincinnati, even Boise, it just doesn't make sense. You know, it just really doesn't. And when West Virginia went to the Big 12, that really threw a wrench in things for BYU too, because if the Big 12 had moved west, maybe went to Boise, I think then logically BYU's in the Big 12. But when they went out to West Virginia, that's just going to be hard to comprehend, seeing a league with 3 time zones. But I think eventually, you know, I really think that eventually there's going to be a break-off with this Division IV possibility, and the top 64, 66 programs, whatever it may be, are going to break off. And I think somehow, some way, BYU is going to find a way into that thing. But I really think BYU fans probably need to realize that it's going to take maybe the length of this college football playoff contract, because I think realignment's going to stand still until this 10, 12-year phase of the playoff, and then after, maybe then we'll see the new wave of this Division 4 and a complete break off from the Group of 5, and then BYU somehow, some way finds themselves in the mix. And I think it helps that the SEC and the ACC view BYU as a Power 5 school just on an image perception, basis alone. I mean, the best league in football. I mean, you're well aware of the SEC. You cover it. I mean, it's the best football league in America. And if they're viewing you as a worthy Power 5 team, that's got to help BYU from a image standpoint. So yeah, I mean, I think it's going to take a long time, and BYU will be, every league will explore every possible option before BYU, but somehow, some way, I think BYU over the next decade will find their way into the group of elite conferences, if you will.
Okay, Mitch Harper from 1320 KFAN, always delivering some exceptional insight and perspective into BYU football. Hey, Mitch, I always learn a lot, so love having you on.
Hey, happy to be on as always, Mark, and let's make it make the next appearance sooner this time.
Very good. Maybe we can catch you after spring practice.
Sounds good, man.